This is the Nothing Phone 3, and it's probably one of, if not the most unique phone that you can buy right now. The design, both with the actual device and within the software, are one of a kind, and it's not just for show either. Many of the elements within it serve a purpose, and Nothing has some great features that you won't find anywhere else. On top of that, you get far greater performance over anything Nothing has previously made, but there are still some areas of concern that you should be aware of. And today, we're going over all of that. Let's get into it. Hey everyone, Kyle Erickson here. I've always been a sucker for transparent or unique designs on tech. It's one of the reasons why I often buy transparent or translucent versions of products, and why to this day the original iMac is still one of my favorite all-time products. In fact, if you look back at the first video that I ever did on the channel, that was on this transparent-backed Xiaomi Mi 8 Pro, but the Nothing Phone 3 takes transparent design to a completely new level. Looking at the back, it's got that retro-futuristic look that you would expect from Nothing, but unlike the previous versions with the Glyph interface, the Phone 3 has a Glyph Matrix that's made up of 489 LEDs and has some interesting functionality. Just like the Glyph interface on older Nothing phones, it will alert you to basic things like notifications, but there's a button just below that will cycle through basic stats like battery life, and can control some apps or Glyph toys as Nothing calls them, like a stopwatch, or games like Spin the Bottle and Rock, Paper, Scissors. In practical use, I think the battery life indicator is probably the most useful thing here, along with general notifications. And Nothing does have a dev kit available that will open this up to third-party devs as well. I've been meaning to check that out and make something myself, but I just haven't found enough time. But I generally think it's a neat, useful feature, and can do some other things that we'll get into in a bit. But in terms of the rest of the design, again, you've got a red square on the back that is a functional LED indicator for when you're recording audio and video, and the camera placement does seem to be the most controversial aspect of this design. It's got this asymmetrical layout that people seem to either love or hate, and I honestly kind of dig it because it's not what we're used to seeing with a standard camera bump. But outside of the transparent back, things look pretty standard for a phone. You've got Gorilla Glass on the front and the back being Gorilla Glass Victus, and the front is Gorilla Glass 7i. I'm not gonna test either for obvious reasons, but there is an aluminum housing that has flat edges and rounded corners, and it weighs in at 218 grams. So it's about the same as the Pixel 9 Pro XL and the S25 Ultra. Unlike those phones though, the button layout is closer to an iPhone, with volume controls on the left side and a power or lock button on the right. But something kind of unique on the Phone 3 that carries over from the 3A is the chrome button just below that, called the Essential key. That's essentially an AI button for the most part, but Nothing's take on it is a bit different than what you might expect. Nothing refers to this as a second memory, where if I click that button, it basically takes a screenshot or a photo if I'm in the camera app, where I can add a note for that particular screen and save it. Say if I want to give it some context or make it actionable, and then if I double click that button, it takes me to the essential space containing all the things that I've saved, including voice notes that I've made by holding down on that same key. I've found this quite useful, where it has reminded me of important dates or deadlines or things that I needed to get done, and it'll even generate a to-do list that, for the most part, does a pretty good job of getting things right. You can also make audio recordings with your phone when it's face down by holding down on the Essential key, where you'll see that red indicator light flash, and the Glyph Matrix shows an audio waveform, which is kinda cool. And again, those recordings will show up in your space, where you can analyze them with AI. Say if you're recording a meeting and you want a summary or a breakdown of what was discussed. The Essential space also has a bit of Nothing's design language sprinkled in, and all of this currently sits on Nothing OS 3.5 with Android 15, and this is without a doubt my favorite Android skin. I believe Nothing is customized to just under 20 widgets with their dot matrix monochrome design language, including things like clocks, weather, calendars, contacts, and so on. And these really make the entire design, inside and out, feel very cohesive. In my opinion, this is one of the only Android phones that gets tinted icons right, and my only complaint with Nothing OS is, when you start to venture outside of the home screen, you do get more of a stock Android feel, where the design language doesn't quite match. That being said, it is a very minor thing, and even the sound effects for things like charging, notifications, and screen lock all pair up really well with the aesthetics, and they do pop visually on the Nothing Phone 3's display. That is a 6.67-inch 1260 by 2800 120Hz OLED panel that goes up to 1600 nits peak brightness or 4500 nits in HDR, so this is easily viewable both in and outdoors. It's super smooth while scrolling or with any motion and looks fantastic for playing games or watching content, but there are a couple things to be aware of here. First of all, this screen does not have LTPO tech that we often see in other flagship phones, and that means despite this having a variable refresh rate, it'll only go down to 30 Hz, where others will go down to 1, so it may be slightly less power efficient, and it's also not quite as color accurate as other flagships. Colors can tend to be a little bit more cool on here, and for 99% of people, that's not really going to make any difference, but if you're someone like me who uses your phone to edit photos in Lightroom from time to time, you may want to play around with the color temperature a bit, and make sure that the picture is matching up with the rest of your devices. Beyond that, you've got a built-in optical fingerprint reader under the screen that works well enough, along with face unlock through the pinhole cutout front-facing camera that does a good job. That camera is a 50 megapixel f2.2 lens that works decent enough for selfies or calls, but I mainly stick to the rear cameras. All three of the rear cameras have 50 megapixel sensors, where the main lens has an f1.68 aperture, the ultra-wide is f2.2, and the 3x telephoto is f2.68. And the photos coming off of them, especially in daylight, have been great, with some exceptions. For starters, the main lens does a fantastic job capturing nice natural images without too much processing or over-sharpening. Portrait mode is great at subject detection, whether you're taking a picture of a person or an object, with nice background blur. And even outside of portrait mode, I find images on close-up subjects just have a nice, pleasant depth of field. That kinda carries over to the 3x telephoto, where again, images are nice and sharp without feeling too over-processed, but because that lens doesn't let in as much light, in darker settings you do lose a bit of detail, which is pretty common for these periscope lenses. And when it comes to the ultra-wide, I would say that the color and dynamic range are good, as are the photos at a glance, but when you really start looking at finer details, things are generally very soft and lack sharpness, which is a bit of a bummer. Normally, the ultra-wide lens is also used for macro mode on most phones, which the Phone 3 does have, but it uses the telephoto lens. So it's more of a traditional macro lens in that sense, and you get way less distortion in macro mode, which is why I much prefer this over an ultra-wide. And I've been more than happy with that as well. On the video side of things, results are good on the main and telephoto lenses, as both have optical image stabilization that does a great job of keeping your image steady. And when you combine that with the autofocus on those lenses, things look excellent. The ultra-wide, again, isn't the best here though, with no autofocus or OIS, and I have two main gripes outside image quality. One, the transitions between lenses feels pretty harsh, so I would probably stick to filming with one lens at a time. And two, really minor thing, but I wish there was some option to record in 4K at 24 frames per second. Right now, you can only record in 4K at 30 or 60 FPS, which means to match up with what I normally shoot in, I have to film in a third-party camera app, but regardless, I'm still pretty happy with the camera system. That being said, if you use AI features like Magic Eraser, AI Unblur, and those types of things, they won't be in Nothing's Photos app, so you'll have to use Google's own Photos app for that stuff, but I literally never use any of that stuff, so it's not factored at all into how I personally use the device. I think Nothing has a pretty healthy approach to AI, where they're not focusing at all on buzzwords, gimmicky image generation, or random tools that people don't generally need, and it just seems a lot more intentful. You get that essential space and the features inside it, like I mentioned, and some built-in Google stuff, like holding down the power button to launch Gemini, and circle to search, which I think are probably what the majority of people use AI for anyway, outside of dedicated AI apps. When it comes to powering all of this stuff, the Phone 3 comes equipped with a Snapdragon 8S Gen 4 chipset with 16 gigs of RAM, and a 512 gig SSD, so it's not the highest performing by any means. In benchmarks, the Snapdragon 8 Elite outperforms it by just over 30% in single and multi-core tests. And it does perform better than the Tensor G4 in the Pixel 9 Pro, but in real-world use, it's very hard to tell the difference between any of these. Just using the phone regularly for things like social, browsing the web and watching content, things are super snappy with no lag or slowness, and even in super demanding games, the Phone 3 has run everything that I've thrown at it without a hitch. Frame rates can be a little bit lower than the 8 Elite chip in the right games, but you're not giving up too much. But I will say, when you do tax the chipset in super resource-heavy games or apps, this thing gets hot, like hotter than any other phone that I've tested since I started testing for heat. Under extended load, this peaked at 50 degrees Celsius for me, which is about 4 or 5 degrees hotter than the OnePlus 13, which also runs a bit warm, but you can definitely feel that heat even if you're not measuring it. Normally, I'd be concerned with what that means for long-term battery health, but the one thing that I will say is it does seem to stay concentrated to the top of the device away from the battery. And the battery itself is silicon carbon, which is a lot more thermally stable than regular lithium-ion batteries, so not a whole lot you need to worry about there. That battery is kind of interesting. At first, I was really excited given that it is a silicon carbon battery and it is 5,150 milliamp hours, so it's bigger than the S25 Ultra and the Pixel 9 Pro XL, but battery life has actually been a bit worse than both of those devices. It's not bad by any means, and it still gets through a full day of use and then some, but that 8S Gen 4 chipset seems to be quite power hungry. It is definitely perceivable compared to those 8 Elite-based devices, and hopefully nothing can optimize it a bit more. That being said, charging is excellent with 65 watts wired charging, where you can get a full 0 to 100% charge in about an hour. And if you prefer to charge wirelessly, you'll get a standard 15 watt charge with 7.5 watts available for reverse charging. In contrast to that though, when it comes to data transfer, that USB-C port only supports USB 2.0 transfer speeds, which again is a bit of a letdown, but you get probably the best wireless specs that I've seen on a phone up to this point, with Wi-Fi 7 and Bluetooth 6. On Wi-Fi, I've had speeds reach over 1,000 megabits per second, which is outstanding for my network. And although this is the only Bluetooth 6.0 device that I currently have, it does come with some upgrades. When using it with other Bluetooth 6 devices, you'll get better latency, tracking or location services, improved security, and increased energy efficiency, so it's nice to be future-proofed in that regard, but general Bluetooth performance has been great, with no drops, and the range has been outstanding with the headphones that I've paired up, and with the OnePlus Watch that I've been using with it. Overall, after using this as my only device over the last couple of weeks, it's been kind of a quirky device, but not in a bad way. Like any other phone, there's always going to be pros and cons, but I think in this case, they're just a little bit different than what we're used to seeing on other flagships. And honestly, especially given the price at $799 USD, I do think that this phone has a lot going for it, even with its downsides. There's a ton of character in here, and I wish more tech companies would take risks and do things differently and get creative with products, rather than optimizing and refining away all the things that make them unique. But I would love to know what you guys think. Are you into this phone and would you buy one? And if not, what's the main thing holding you back from picking up a Phone 3? Let me know in the comments down below. That's all I got for you today. I hope you enjoyed this video or you found it useful. If you did, feel free to hit that like button. If you'd like to see more tech-related content or help me develop a Glyph Matrix app that shows the text "Help me" whenever you're in a meeting, please subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next upload.